who's doing a lot of this work with the monkeys. It was the red light was preferred relative to non-disruption. In other words, if you use this spectrum, you'll know that you'll be completely. And it was basically we knew that it was going to be a problem with the red because the red really had serious problems, aesthetic problems. And so the issue was how far away from the red could we go? And so we didn't tread very far. We kept it red, amber, and you can sort of see that it is not that, but it was at a level where it wasn't encroaching on the melanopsin reception. So we didn't do any comparisons between the red and the amber. What we did was we used their data and said, as long as we're outside of this wavelength, we're going to be okay, and then we're going to do intensity. Now, when we put this into the hospitals, we can monitor two things. One is wakefulness, which we can monitor quite easily. They get a little bit more nervous when I start monitoring melatonin, and you can do that with blood. You know, they get nervous with that. Okay, but that's something we're going to be doing. We're going to be monitoring melatonin, saliva tests, and wakefulness. But a lot of this is sort of based on the data that, when you look at sort of the spectrum effects, is sort of drawing a line and saying we're going to be outside of that region, and understanding that today that they've got 500 lux of blue light inside these spaces, so it's sort of like there's a fire in the bathroom, and right now we need to turn that off, and then get to red amber, and then do the melatonin test. We know it's going to be better. It's how much better.
Professor, what about in the ICU, intensive care unit?
Yes.
Is there a different? Is there a limitation of using circadian because in that case, the patient is in critical condition,
yes,
and the nurse want more visibility so that to observe the patient from far away.
Yeah. So totally with you on that. Totally agree with you. So one of the big drivers on this was the inspection functions. So the idea was that there's kind of a standard agreement that said, look, if it's normal care, if it's health care, assisted living, normal care, yes, we're all on board. This is all fine. We want the trypsin hazards. We want the color, everything. But we have, in the ICU, we have 100%, we can't worry about this. We need to worry about the patient. Okay? So part of the protocol here is that it's sort of in the mid-level care. If there's a problem, the nurses want to have one button that they hit, and this comes on, full level. It's on. So the agreement is sort of on the mid-care that they can do all the circadian, they agree with all the color, the night lighting, but they want one button. When there's a problem, that light comes on. Okay? On the ICU one, in which it's like, we'll worry about the circadian next, but right now we're worried about whether they're breathing or not. Then that's a different issue. All this gets built in, but it just goes into ICU units. So you push a button, that light just is on. The issue is today we don't have any of that kind of stuff. So we're looking at sort of three levels. There's the 100% full light. The person's, we're watching them whether they're going to die or not, breathe. Okay. The next one is like they're being monitored and it's back and forth, and then there's sort of the normal. The issue is that we don't have any of this today. But it's kind of when we first started this 3 years ago, when we engaged with these folks, they said, no, our interest is whether people are breathing. And it's gone full circle on this because it was the trips and falls. The color issue brought the medical people in because the medical people said they didn't know. They thought this was, hospital light was gray light. It wasn't until I showed them the side-by-side hand picture, they couldn't believe how their lighting was. It's an excellent point. The issue is we sort of put that whole layer on so you can dial whatever it is. Because when I go into a nursing group and they say, thank you, but we need one button. So I'm going to get a big red button on the wall. Excellent question. Please.
Is there any study done to show the correlation between color temperature versus the stress level of the patient?
There's some literature on sort of wakefulness, alertness. Yeah, I mean, there's been studies that haven't been done in hospitals. They've been done on office workers. And there's been quite a bit of work on this. I mean, there's probably two different things going on there from what I've seen in the literature. One is there's physiological things that happen to your eye. Your pupil gets really small, and there's the higher the color temperature, the blue end of the spectrum has a major effect on the melanopsin receptor that communicates hormones, but it also communicates brightness, your feeling of brightness. And so that helps alertness. Okay? And so, so there's these geometric changes that happen relative to spectrum, but then there's also hormones that change relative to spectrum. So I suspect that on the office study, this kind of feeling of alertness is that, you know, if you're foggy in the morning, you might have a higher level of melatonin. The melatonin needs to be bleached out. There's also, inverse relationship on cortisol and other stimulating hormones. So my understanding is that there's both a hormonal effect and also a geometric effect. I'm more familiar with the geometric effects in offices because I do a lot of measurements of visibility. And if you put people in a high color temperature environment, it's stimulating. You know, it's like, bright. And that's when we go to work in the morning, that's, at least in North America, that's what we have. When I go home at night, it's 2,700. You folks all go home to 6,500 Kelvin, right? Most of us. How many people have 6,500 Kelvin at home? All, right?
Don't mind.
No, I'm not going to say. It'd be interesting. I predict that we're going to regulate spectrum because there's. I mean, the AMA is one of the most conservative organizations on the planet, the American Medical Association. They don't do anything unless there's a fire, you know. And they've already said blue is bad for us. And all the fluorescents and all the LEDs are very heavy blue pumps. Just not good for us.
Well, in Thailand, I think there's a group of researchers at Ramatipudi Hospital at Mahidol University. I think they are exploring the physical environment, and not sure that they also looking at lighting and spectrum. So they're looking at after all patients coming out of ICU, but not in the ICU, but after the ICU, how the physical environment can reduce the time that they have to stay in that unit.
I mean, there's some deep work going on in the ICU people have talked to us about, we're really starting to think about, just how much light we want to have in these places. I mean, the breathing part is important, but the sleep is also important too. And so they're looking at this. I know in a lot of the the child care and the neonatal wards, they're looking at the amount of light and being very disruptive. So I think this is going to be a big driver. Our issue is that there's this kind of event happening where the hospitals are all moving to new lighting. And the lighting they put in now is going to be with us for the next 20 years. And so the idea is to embed this with enough flexibility to allow for all of this kind of functionality. We're not 100% on the controls. There's issues that we don't know, but there's things that we do know. And those we want to implement now.
Any more questions? Yes.
you recommend me about how to design or put for about brain health?
Brain health? You sort of be a little bit more specific? I mean, in terms of,
Put for brain and then put to feeling more, look like feeling more active and to make more active. Like this.
well, the one thing I know is from the office studies that alertness and wakefulness is very much driven by spectrum. And so, and higher color temperatures correlate with that. You know, so it's the, I guess if you want a lot of, if you have young students and you want them to be very sharp and mindful, I would light it with, 5,000 Kelvin or above. Yeah. And if you look at schools, I mean, schools that have access to daylight and the stuff coming through the windows is very high color temperature. And there's lots of data on there's some good preference studies on daylight where people have preference, but there's been some beginning studies looking at scholastic capabilities. And students who have full access to daylight tend to do better. They score better on exams, they work harder, all the rest of it. Now those studies are tricky. I've seen some people, productivity is a big issue in lighting, and they're looking at trying to develop productivity studies that people have access to daylight are more productive. Unclear. Unclear. Because I think some very, very productive people working in the dark. But certainly some of the school stuff is very, very interesting. I always think of evolution as a good teacher, and that any deviation from our evolutionary vision is going to be not a good thing. Makes sense? Please.
This kind of lighting system can be applied or effective for the special hospitals such as the mental hospital.
Yeah, so we started out in assisted living. And assisted living is sort of like a hotel for older people. Right? And there was strong interest in this, particularly on the trips and falls. And so I think we then started navigating into residential, specialized residential. And so I think that and the hospitals is the next. The hospitals one, we came into that because all hospitals are changing their lighting. And all the new hospitals are struggling what to do. So I think that there's wide application for this. I mean, Circadian isn't really anything special. I always sort of use examples of my grandparents' home. That was the perfect design. People, it's not that complex. It's just that what we've done is we've kind of created all this technology that sort of speaks away from our evolution. So I think in many places that in specialized environments like this, I've seen some of the papers on dementia and specialized mental care that very strong relationship on sort of circadian balance and dementia. And so there's deep interest in this from that community. People who are working with mentally disturbed people. I have seen less work done on paint color, looking at colors of how we paint walls. And there's all this stuff about if you use green paint, people are more relaxed, than if you use red paint, for example. But most of the work I've seen has been on circadian disruption and sleep. We know that when there's sleep disorders, people are more mentally. Big problem with elder care is sleep disruption, because people aren't getting enough sleep anyway. And so there's really strong interest within the elder care. And a lot of these people have sort of issues, mental issues. I mean, I think even in residential, I mean, there's lots of folks interested. I mean, I put all this stuff in at home. I mean, most people think I'm a nut, but I put all this at home. I mean, I don't have any blue pumps in my house at all. No blue light at all.